This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Welcome to the 40 Under 40 Business Insights, Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling. Stand by, we'll be starting shortly.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 40 Under 40 Business Insights, Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling event, proudly delivered by AsiaLink in partnership with KPMG's Asian Female Leaders Network. It's such a huge pleasure to be here with all of you today. I can see that we still have many people joining. Before we begin today's proceedings, I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who've been custodians of this land for thousands of years. I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and pay my deep respects to all First Nations people joining us virtually today. Just a little bit of housekeeping as we're starting the event today. I'd like to advise everybody that we are being recorded. We would encourage our participants to please share views, ask questions and comments in the Q&A box below on your screen. We'd love to hear from you because it's such a great opportunity for all of us to share today. And also say, if you want to extend today's dialogue on social media, be sure to tweet or tag at KPMG Australia and at AsiaLink. By way of background, we're absolutely thrilled to be partnering on this event today with KPMG's Asian Female Leaders Group. The discussion today is a topical one and really close to our hearts. Here at AsiaLink, our mission is to drive Australia's closer engagement between Australia and Asia so that we have a strong shared future for all. And advocating diversity and inclusion and the incredibly important role that our Asian Australian community plays in Australia's broader community and in our national success is actually one of our highest priorities. We're very fortunate to have today 5 outstanding young leaders and pioneers to share their stories. The young women joining us today were all recognised in the 40 Under 40 Most Influential Asian Australians Awards. The awards are an initiative driven by AsiaLink, the Australian National University, Johnson Partners and PwC Australia. They've been running for only 2 years, but in that period have been hugely successful in bringing to light these incredible young leaders from the Asian Australian community who are making such a decisive contribution to all of us. You're going to hear today from these young women around 3 specific issues. Their unique experiences, their stories, and their drivers for success. They're going to talk a little bit about their identities and how they've stayed true to themselves on the journey. And most importantly, they're going to talk about how they've managed change and initiated new forms of leadership in our community. Those we have with us for our panel today include Shelli Trung, who is the Managing Partner, Australia and Southeast Asia at Reach Australia. Shivali Nayak, who is Senior Content Producer at ABC Education. Dr. Meru Sheel, a Global Health Researcher and an infectious diseases epidemiologist. Westpac Research Fellow at the Australian National University. Wesa Chau, the CEO of Cultural Intelligence. And Tessa Sullivan, lawyer and officer of the Supreme Court of Victoria. It also gives me great pleasure to welcome Karina Bertram, who is Partner, Policy, Programs and Evaluation at KPMG. We're absolutely delighted to be working closely with Karina, who is also a member of the AsiaLink Council and a passionate leader and advocate for inclusive leadership. Karina is going to be providing the closing remarks this afternoon. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you to Kirsten Tran, who is going to be leading today's session. She's the co-vice president of KPMG's Asian Female Leaders Community. She's going to be your facilitator for today. Kirsten is herself a remarkable young woman. She's second generation Vietnamese Australian. She's associate director within the Sydney Engineering and Asset Management team at KPMG, and is truly passionate about cultural and linguistic diversity and gender representation. I'm also advised that Kirsten has led KPMG's Sydney Dragon Boating team since 2015. So she has a great passion for this team sport that has its roots founded, of course, in Chinese history. So with that, Kirsten, can I welcome you and pass you across to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Penny, for that very, very lovely introduction. So hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Kirsten Tran. I'm an Associate Director from the Engineering and Asset Management team here in Sydney. And I'm also the Co-Vice President of the Asian Female Leaders Community, which was actually founded by two very amazing women here at KPMG, Shirley and Lynn Teo. I'm really very excited and honoured today to have been given the opportunity to moderate this panel and speak to 5 very amazing Asian Australian women about breaking the bamboo ceiling. For some context, for those who don't know, you've likely heard of the glass ceiling, but the term bamboo ceiling was coined by Asian American author and executive coach Jane Hun, who was describing a culmination of individual, cultural, and organizational forces that hinder people of Asian descent from attaining executive positions inside corporate organizations. For myself, I've worked in a corporate organization for all of my working life. So the bamboo ceiling is something that very much resonates with me, as I've personally seen those barriers for myself and for others of Asian descent in the workplace. But at the same time, breaking the bamboo ceiling is not impossible, and it's a very exciting sight to behold. I especially love seeing trailblazing Asian women in leadership positions, and I love hearing their stories, and I love gaining inspiration from them. So with that, I have the very distinct pleasure today to be able to gain insights and inspiration from 5 women who have done just that and broken through. So Shivali, Dr. Meru, Wesa, Shelli, and Tessa, I would like to start our conversation off with a bit of an icebreaker. Could you please share a little bit about yourselves and share what the accomplishment was which led you to winning the 40 Under 40 award? I might start with Shivali.
Thanks, Kirsten. A little bit more about myself. So I'm currently working in the education team at the ABC. So I manage Learn English, which is a platform for anyone learning English as an additional language. I started out as a journalist, and I moved into education because it was marrying my 2 passions, education and journalism. I'm also part of the ABC's employee group, ABC Belong. It is a staff-led group that aims to raise awareness about cultural and linguistic diversity at the ABC, and also bring along allies in the conversation. So what has led me to winning the 40 Under 40? I must thank AsiaLink for the very, very generous recognition. And I really didn't expect it, because I've met so many wonderful people through this network who have done such amazing things and just continue to inspire me every day. I suppose it was really a recognition that really sort of made me more confident and more like I had stronger conviction to drive and advocate for diversity. So I hope to continue doing this, and which is why I'm here today.
Thank you, Shivali. I might go to Shelli next.
Hi there. So I'm Shelley Trung. I'm the managing partner for Reach Australia. I think the recognition came down to really the very few women that are in decision making for venture capital. So venture capital is investments into early stage technology companies. And so, you know, very few women, roughly 12% of women. And if you break that down even further into minority women and Asian women, it ends up being even half of that. So it's just sort of I think Penny referred to me as a unicorn a little while ago, and I quite like that word, so I'm going to reuse it. But very much so just the work around the investment that I do make, as well as the fact that I was a second female partner in the firm, but I've now brought on board a full female venture team. And on top of that also, I've been making investments, roughly a third of our investments are female led, which is sort of usually portfolio funds are roughly 10% female led founders. So I'm quite proud of those results, and it's not without some effort. So those sort of the couple of points, I guess, were key to the 40 under 40. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the second question, but I don't know if I need to still answer that. That was quite a long answer for me for the first one.
Oh, no, it's just about how your accomplishment for winning the 40 under 40.
Okay, awesome. Happy to hand it over to the next person.
Yeah, perfect. Meru, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kirsten, and thank you for the invitation to AsiaLink and KPMG AFL team to be on this panel. And so I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist, and in a year of pandemic, we're definitely much talked about as a profession. So I work in essentially infectious diseases and vaccines and public health emergencies, have for a number of years, and moved to Australia about nearly 15 years ago to do my PhD on new vaccines for a particular type of infectious diseases, which is quite highly prevalent in Aboriginal populations of Australia and some of the lower middle income countries. So it is truly a disease of poverty where you see major barriers in access to health. So I've worked in this sector for a long time, and over the years became more and more interested in public health, and I've been working in emergencies. But how I ended up at 40 under 40, and I'm incredibly grateful for the recognition, was a complete surprise, but also it was an Asian colleague of mine who nudged me to apply. I think it was like 1 or 2 days before the deadline. He was like, I think you should apply for this. And I was like, really? You think? Like, I don't think I'll win it. He's like, just do it. It won't take you that much time. Just spend a bit of time and put in a self-nomination. And I did, and I was really surprised to win it. But I think what it has really given me is that confidence to say, okay, well, I am a leader in my field. I don't have to get to, especially because I do spend a lot of time, my main career bread and butter has been academic research. There is this, I guess, a divide that you're only a leader when you're a level E professor at the top, or you are much older and white and grey hair. And so I think that this particular recognition and that change in language that we're having, I think, is quite, I think, empowering for people, that leadership starts very early on and you don't have to be at the top of the so-called career pathway to be a leader. But also I think it inspires me to really then encourage more women of diverse backgrounds in leadership position, and people generally, not just women, but even men from diverse backgrounds to be in leadership. And I ideally it not be a conversation, that we should just be able to have no conversation about it, but I think we're far away from it. So I might pass it to somebody else.
Thank you very much, Meru. I'll hand it over to Tessa next.
Hi, can you hear me? Sorry. I'm Tessa Sullivan. I'm a lawyer and officer of the Supreme Court of Victoria. I currently work as an academic at the University of New England and an in-house legal counsel for a private property business. So the reason that I'm here is that I used to be a politician. I was a councillor on the Melbourne City Council. Unfortunately, I resigned due to being sexually harassed by the former Lord Mayor. And I guess I was essentially one of the first women in politics to sort of spearhead the #MeToo movement that was occurring at the time. And yeah, my actions led to sweeping changes in workplace protection laws, particularly in the Councillor Code of Conduct, the Melbourne City Council Act, the Local Government Act. And yeah, that's why I'm here today. I won the 40 Under 40 award for leading to the legislative changes in government. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Tessa. And last but not least, Wesa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Wesa Chau, and very honoured to be recognised as one of the 40 Under 40 by AsiaLink and ANU and a few others. And I guess I've been talking about cultural diversity for many, many years, dating back to when I was at university. Started the Australian Federation of International Students, so fighting for international student rights. And talking about cultural diversity in that space, and leading from that have been leading quite a lot of national conversations around racism, around diversity, around inclusion. So I've been pretty much doing this for about 20 years. And now I'm CEO of my own company, Cultural Intelligence. So I do consulting, research, and training around cultural diversity, and a thought leader in this space. And now also with the COVID-inspired racism that happened towards particularly Asian Australians, have been leading a lot of conversations around racism in that space as well. And I guess in the past few years, I've also been doing quite a lot of research around Asian Australian, particularly in leadership, because we sometimes talk about racism, but then we forget to really think about how do we actually develop more Asian Australian leaders. So it's really wonderful to see platforms like this, to be having conversations in this manner to talk about female Asian leaders and how do we actually support more of us, and to be able to start seeing many more Asian Australian women, particularly in politics, in business, in universities, media, everywhere. So hopefully we'll start a whole generation of change.
Thank you very much, Wesa. Thank you for all the panelists and their lovely introductions. You're all super, super accomplished. I'm going to start directing my questions specifically to each speaker, and they're going to shed some more insight around their particular areas. So the first question is to Shivali. According to an Australian Human Rights Commission report in 2018, less than 5% of Australians of Asian heritage make it to senior executive levels. So only 1.6% become CEOs. Do you think what we are doing as a community as of recent is enough to help these numbers? And what do you think we can do better going forwards to make a more significant impact?
Thanks, Kirsten. Obviously, the 5% and 1.6%, are really troubling and concerning numbers. So it's obvious there isn't enough that's being done. In terms of what we can do better going forwards, I think there's so much we can do, because I think this area is really underserved. So for example, the conversation we're having today, it's great that we're raising awareness, we're advocating, and we are making sure that the issues that we're discussing is supporting each other, or whoever is listening feels that, oh, okay, I'm not the only one with this experience. So for a long time, I felt like that. I always used to think, oh, I think I'm just overthinking things, or maybe no, it's not really what it is. But there was a lot of unconscious bias experienced. There was a lot of discrimination I've faced. And obviously for me, I think that we should have a lot less of that. So some of the things that's really helped me is I've had really good mentors and I've had really good allies. So for example, the reason I'm here in this position today at the ABC is solely because of my 3 wonderful bosses because they really saw my experience coming to Australia as a migrant and having all that lack of Australian experience that a lot of employers talk about as an advantage. And not all of them were from a diverse background themselves, but they chose to recognize that. So I really appreciate that. So I think we should do more of that. We should have mentors and allies. I think we also need a company-wide focus on diversity. We've done really well in the gender space, I think. Many companies have, boards that are more reflective of gender and gender diversity. We should have that company-wide focus for cultural diversity as well. So for example, at the ABC, we have now made a commitment to reflect contemporary Australia. So that means, as a start, having diverse talent, having diverse employees, having diverse managers, and at the hopefully eventually at the board level as well. Having said all this, I think it takes time. So I think we have to keep chipping away at it. It's not something everyone understands why it needs to be done. In my experience, I've noticed you can throw a bunch of data at people. You can talk about something using your own experience, but I think it's a lot of stakeholder management that I find myself doing, explaining to people why diversity is important, why it's better for everyone, not just the diverse people or not just for women. It just makes society better from a social justice point of view.
No, that's very true, Shivali. And it's interesting what you say about mentors and supporters, because early in your career, without those mentors and supporters, you don't quite have the confidence. So it rings very true, and that's certainly been the case for me. Thank you very much for that insight. Meru, I'm going to direct this next question to you. Are there aspects of STEM culture that you feel contributes to the empowerment of women?
Yeah, look, that's a really interesting question. Science and medicine, technology, they're quite unique in the way they're packaged, and between STEM cultures itself, it's quite unique because health and medicine is very different to say technology and engineering, and we're dealing with very complex and different issues across those cultures. And it's really what works, positive and supportive environments, empowering people. When we talk about empowerment, it's not hard to imagine what a positive, supportive environment is, or as Shivali talked about, even mentoring. And, there's in academic cultures and STEM cultures, we talk a lot about sponsorships and allies. But it's really much more challenging to actually make it happen. It's a long, slow process, and there's probably things that are more disempowering that we recognize that absolutely don't work. But definitely from a gender and diversity, we understand in gender, of course, maternity leave issues and women having time off for maternity leave can have a huge impact on people's careers and returning to work in any sector for that matter, because you do your peak career age, or when you start growing up in your career, tends to coincide with when most women are able to have children. It's not even also a matter of choice. They're able to have children. That's the peak age we're talking about. But also lots of issues, especially around leadership, exist for women who may not have children or people from diverse backgrounds. So I think having that conversation is really important. I think it's easier to say a positive and supportive environment, not having tall poppy, not talking negatively, and creating environments that are more inclusive on purpose. And I really strongly and genuinely believe that if you're not inclusive on purpose, by default, you tend to be exclusive. So I think there needs to be greater effort at mapping out who does what based on skills and including people. And they'll see that actually diversity will naturally come into. It's more the fact that people tap on people's shoulders of who they know. And that just festers this culture of who you know, rather than bringing in diverse opinions and opportunities to people. But I might stop there for now.
No, it's very true what you say. Having an inclusive culture is just so important. You don't want to have people or groups forming cliques and then being exclusive of others. So that's certainly true. The next question here is for Wesa. This is quite an interesting question, and I quite like it. It can be difficult to distill down the benefits of cultural diversity. And in your work, how would you convey this to your clients and customers?
Well, first of all, I think the conversation I usually start off with is really about, well, if you want to have good customers, if you want to be able to attract customers, you need people who can speak to your customers. So when we think about Australia being much more multicultural nowadays, if you want to be able to work with your customers, you need people who speak their language. You need people who understand their thinking and understand how to frame messages in order to attract your customers. So that's number one. And of course, we also know that research have shown that multicultural teams are more creative. We know multicultural teams bring people together, and also people feel much more belong in their workplaces. So these are some of the benefits. And also in 2019, I launched a research that looked at Asian Australian leaders in Australia. And one of the things that we've shown was that there are clear differences between Anglo-Australian leaders and Asian Australian leaders in their natural talents. And when we talk about natural talents, is what they're natural at doing. And so Asian Australian leaders in Australia tend to be more problem solvers and be able to use data more proficiently in order to actually make decisions. So when we think about in the information age, we actually need more people who can actually read information and be able to ask information. For example, if you're on a board, and I sit on a number of boards myself, that you need to be able to distill information and be able to problem solve based on that. So if we have more Asian Australian leaders on boards, that's what the benefit would be for organizations. So at the moment, the Anglo-Australian leaders tend to be better at rapport building. So it's also very important. So we're not saying one group is better than the other. We actually need the mix, and that's what we're actually talking about. We're actually talking about having that breadth and having that diversity, so that you've got some people who are very good at rapport building, and we need that, but you also want people who are very good at problem solvers and be able to ask the right questions when you're actually sitting on the board. So these are some of the ways in which I talk to organizations about. And I now also started I recently developed a tool to be able to measure people's cultural competency and be able to help people really understand and be able to measure it, because we need to start having conversations about evidence-based as well, and be able to do things in such a way that it's not just a conversation saying, well, it's equality, and it is, and I think that conversation still needs to happen, but then it's more than just about equality. It's actually about having those outcomes as well. And when we see diverse teams, we will see actually better outcomes for businesses.
Yeah, like the reason why I find that question very interesting is because anecdotally I can say that things feel very warm and fuzzy when I see a culturally diverse team, but it's having that evidence and the backing to actually say it does benefit society overall and a company and an organization. So thank you very much, Wesa, for that insight. The next question is for Shelli. So you touched on this in your introduction earlier, but your biography also mentioned that only 13%, I think you just said 12% actually, of women worldwide are involved in venture investment decision making. And then you said there's half that are Asian, which is quite a shocking statistic to me. Do you have any tips for Asian women to find their confidence and their voice in such a male-dominated environment?
I think that one of the first things is embrace your Asianness, embrace your uniqueness. This is something I certainly had to learn over time. So, it's certainly a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning, but I'll probably share a bit of an anecdotal story. I lived in New York and the States for many years. And so, stepping into a room with real estate and venture capital and technology, and then you're sort of under 40, you're standing out. You're standing out like, for me, I sort of embrace that, because one of the challenging things when you walk into a room is actually being memorable, right? You get a lot of startup founders pitching you, and when you are female and you're Asian, and particularly for me going to the States, I had no Ivy League friends, which is important in the States. I was a 5 feet tall little Asian woman, and I sound like Hugh Jackman, right? Like, why, normally I'd be putting up my hand to ask a question, and everybody would turn around and go, why is Hugh Jackman's voice coming out of this tiny little Asian woman? But I embrace that. I think we need to get comfortable with standing out and standing up. That's, certainly not a thing that I'm still comfortable with, and I'm sure all the panelists, have felt that at some point in time. So I think one of the key things is really just understand your uniqueness means that you have unique perspectives as well. And that means you can add value in any situation. And to really celebrate that and to really embrace that as well. It is certainly uncomfortable, in the beginning, and certainly going into room networking, it is really uncomfortable, and you're probably going to do it badly in the beginning. I certainly was not, if you met me at high school, you would not think I'm the same person. So I think just really understanding that, look, you are going to be probably one of the very few people in the room, but as a result, that's amazing. You stand out. Everyone's going to remember you. Everyone is going to remember you. And that's actually the hardest thing when it comes to networking, actually being remembered. And to embrace that, value your uniqueness, and then really understanding that that is valuable in the fact that you can have unique insights and contribute differently. I see this time and time again with other women on the boards that I've sat in, and it's just amazing the way things are thought through differently. And going back to Wesa's point about customers, like if your end customer is a certain demographic and you don't have them in the room, then your value add isn't there. So just try and think of it that way. They're missing out, effectively. So I think that's just a couple of quick tips. But understand that it is probably going to be uncomfortable. That's okay. That's okay. That's how you grow. And secondly, do your best to embrace it and have a bit of fun, really.
I certainly sympathise with the 5 feet tall thing, Shelley. I'm also 5 feet tall, but that's fine. I think I just get called a pocket rocket regardless. So, and you're right about standing out in that sense. The next question is for you, Tessa. Thank you for your advocacy and campaigns on violence against women and leading the changes in legislations to protect the vulnerable. When reading your story, I was particularly disturbed, and obviously no one likes reading that sort of stuff, but like, how did you find the courage to speak up and stand up for what is right?
That's a very good question. So I guess how I sort of view courage is, courage is not a natural thing. It's something that you have to draw upon. And it sounds cheesy, but it's 100% true. It really does come from deep within. And I think essentially I sort of knew that despite all the sort of, the media, the sensationalism, the, having it out there in the public spotlight, that the whole political sort of world, the legal world, I just knew that I had something that my perpetrator would never have. And that was ultimately that I had the truth. And I think that there is a real power in that. There is a strength. And I think on top of it, I obviously felt a moral obligation, once I knew about the other women. And I guess in my case, this perpetrator had been having sort of offences in various areas, from when he was a teacher to when he was almost premier to when he was Lord Mayor, over a 40-year period. I mean, I wasn't even born yet. The amount of women that sort of came forward, I think, was quite compelling. But I remember at the time when it was private and I knew about the other women in the organisation that were also being subject to this harassment. I remember speaking to my husband, and we have 2 young daughters, and he said, well, what if you resign and don't say anything, and in 5 years, we find that he's done this to someone else and you could have stopped it? How would you feel? And I just couldn't live with myself. I mean, I couldn't be a bystander, really. We teach our children, to not stand aside for the wrong behavior, and we want them to be upstanders, not bystanders. And I made the decision to call this out. To be honest, it was obviously really gut churning, full of anxiety, heart wrenching. I was essentially giving up my career. I was resigning. And it was a real catch-22. I mean, essentially I lost a lot. And I think that's a point of sort of, women in particular, that we do sacrifice a lot for these jobs. And I did, I lost a lot, my job, my privacy, confidence. I think overall sexual harassment, assault, it's an embarrassing thing in the sense that there's a lot of shame. It's such a personal, horrible thing to happen to you. You feel very exposed and disgusting and vulnerable. And I think if you could almost think of the most embarrassing thing to happen to you and the whole world gets to read about it, it's extremely confronting and awful. And as we can see with what's happening sort of with the marches, with Grace Tame's story, with Brittany Higgins, that it is extremely personal and upsetting. And if you dissect it and pull it apart, there's really sort of no glory or positivity to it. It's actually awful. So as I said, once I became aware that my perpetrator had been committing these vile acts for a very long time, I sort of looked outside at the construct that protects these things too, the lack of laws that surround these workplace issues. And I think it's really important to really tap into that rage. I mean, I was sickened beyond belief by what was happening. And I realized that even if I wasn't the first one that he had done it to, damn it, I was going to be the last. I was going to break that chain and make sure it never happened to another woman. I was going to protect my generation and the next, because I think that is how change starts. And the number of women who come forward with something like this don't do it because they want to, they do it because they have to. So I guess to answer your question, I feel that, courage comes from truth, from doing the right thing. And at the end of the day, you're the only person that you have to live with. So you need to like what you do and how you behave in the world.
That very, very encouraging words, Tessa. And as I say, very disturbing for me to hear about and read about. But following on from that, given your experience and what you went through, what would your advice be for Asian females, especially in combating harassment and speaking up?
Well, I think if we sort of look, I guess, at the statistics, there is a high likelihood, obviously, that women are more likely to be sexually harassed than men. And the numbers, from the Australian Human Rights Commission, Kate Jenkins' report, are quite astronomical, really, if you think about it. 1 in 2 women are sexually harassed in the workplace. That's 50% of the female workforce population. And that's just sort of what we know, what's reported. And that's not to say that men aren't affected too. I mean, 1 in 4 men are sexually harassed in the workplace, and that's a quarter of our male workforce. And that's quite, that's an epidemic. If we sort of apply those numbers to anything else, to disease or famine, or it's considered an epidemic, really, and it's something that needs to be addressed. We also know statistically that if you're in a minority, such as if you're Black, if you're Asian, if you're Hispanic, if you're in any of those sort of ethnic minority groups or even religious groups, that you're more likely to, I guess, be targeted in those circumstances, but what's more, have a cultural reasoning for not coming forward if you come from a conservative society or in certain Asian societies as well. But what I think is really important to I guess, remember is that, nobody sort of lives in a microcosm. We don't live in a vacuum. And if the sexual harassment, and really it's essentially seen as a workplace health and safety issue. I mean, you're not safe at work. If you think about these numbers being that sexual harassment is rife, and we think about other numbers such as, the lack of gender inequity, the lack of diversity, we need to actually accept that it is how it is. And if we feel that we live in an equal, egalitarian world, then we really are kidding. you know, I had a conversation with the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard a few weeks ago, and in her new book, she said that women are 100 years from being financially and powerfully equal to a man. That if we're in a boardroom, you know, they're more likely to listen to a man talking about sexism as opposed to a woman talking about sexism. I mean, these are sort of pathetic numbers, really. And I think that it's just really not good enough. And particularly if we look at something like the workplace, you know, it's the most time that we really spend away from our family. It's what takes us away from our children and our friends and our life. You need to feel safe and honored and respected, and be, you know, professional in these roles, because it's such a huge integral part of our lives. And I do feel that firstly, as women, we have greater struggles, and as a minority, as Asians, we have greater struggles. And that needs to be addressed, you know, just the whitewashing of the world. And to just give you an example, you know, and I'm sure any Asian or migrant person or immigrant to Australia will be able to tell you that they would have, you know, a plethora of stories related something directly to race. And there's absolutely no sort of animosity or I don't know, negativity when I say these things. I'm basing it off facts. You know, I have a scientific background, and I'm literally like, these are the statistics, aren't they? So, but to give you an example, I'm currently doing my second master's. I'm doing a master's in journalism on a scholarship at Harvard. And part of that is to undertake an internship, and I'm about to start one at a well-known news channel. But I remember thinking, you know, if we think about our own commercial televisions in Australia, apart from SBS and the ABC, you know, how many Asians do you see? The actual answer is none. And I have actually met up with news directors before, one that's quite a prominent one that has worked in the industry for 17 years. And he said in the whole time that he'd run the network, they'd never hired one Asian journalist. Another actually told me, a director in Sydney, that he doubted that they would ever see a permanent Asian news anchor on commercial television. Now, you know, maybe it's because they didn't have the right applicants, or the young Asian journalism student sort of looks at the Caucasian people on air and thinks that there's, you know, no point applying. Is it because the network only has a particular look, a blonde, blue-eyed sort of Caucasian look? Either way, the answer is that we have no Asians in an industry that needs it. How does the news, something that we interact with day to day, you know, trust what they're saying when no one on air disseminating the news actually even looks like us or acts like us or is from our cultural background? You know, and I always sort of say it's like you need to read the room. It's like, how can you have I don't know, for example, a person that's not Chinese doing an interview about a Chinese festival? You know, it's sort of like having some 80-year-old man interviewing a woman on menstrual cramps or something. It's just almost, you know, we need to have some perspective on the fact that the audience is an armchair expert, and they're well aware of their diversity and what's important and the issues that they'd like to see presented. So, and I think the greater message really is that we fail as a society. When you fail to represent everyone, we actually represent no one. And I think that has to be kept in mind moving forward. You know, the struggle is real, it exists, call it what it is, but, you know, fight for the you want.
That's very true, Tessa. I thought I'd let the audience know that there is a Q&A. So if you do wish to drop any questions to all the panel members or any of them specifically, so please feel free. We did have a couple of questions come in from the audience prior to the event. This is directed to Shivali, and this is quite a meaty question, so bear with me. And it relates to identity. Do you experience moments where you could respond to a situation in many ways through the multiple cultural lenses that you hold? So for the audience, I believe Shivali speaks multiple languages, and so the question's about, like, what's the most important element to navigate these intercultural pools? They've elaborated in this question. While it may come easy to an Australian of Australian descent with Australian peers, it seems to be a real challenge to someone who descends from countries A and B and grew up in country C and lives in country D. And this audience member was hoping that you could share some of your insights as a polyglot who understands the nuances of many cultures.
Wow. I don't know whether I have any answers, but I feel exactly what you're saying. So I was born in India. I moved to Singapore when I was 3, and basically called Singapore my first home. And now I live in Australia. I've only been here for about 8 years, and this is my second home, or my other home. When I first got here, I think it was really challenging to sort of shed off that Asian experience that I had. So I was a business journalist in Singapore. I couldn't do that here. Some of the reasons Tessa has already mentioned. I felt I couldn't. I don't really have evidence, like empirical evidence to prove that, but I didn't get very far. So I mentioned at the start, I had 3 wonderful bosses. The first one, really sort of saw my experience and my Asian experience and really elevated me by giving me a position to still practice journalism. If not for her, I don't think I would be here today. So it is definitely a challenge, and I can see a lot of migrants that come in are always telling me, oh, I need to get this Australian experience, and I've got all this experience from Asia. And I find that very strange. If we want to engage with the powers of the world at the moment, the center of the world right now is really Asia. That's where everything's happening. That's where business is being done. That's where the movers and shakers are. So why wouldn't hiring managers or companies in Australia see that as an advantage? I'd like to call it the cultural wealth of knowledge, if you will. They know a lot more of the markets you're trying to reach. They know a lot more of the customers that you're possibly trying to reach because there's more opportunity out there. But this is something that I think still needs to be improved. And I've personally faced that. In terms of then sort of, surviving here with all that Asian experience, what I had to do was to do a pivot in my career. Thankfully for me, I had a second passion. I also understand lots of people are very, very highly qualified in one area. So for me, I was able to pivot within the same organization in a different department. So that for me was education. In education itself, I've seen that there are a lot of differences in terms of staff and students. So when I do school visits, I can see the staff is really of a very mono background-wise, very like one sort of from a very similar background, often Anglo backgrounds. And then you look at the students and they're very, very diverse. Often, like for example, in my daughter's school, I live in outer East Melbourne. My daughter's school has 90% students from an East Asian background. She is the one South Asian person, and there are 2 other Anglo people. So that's really the new, I think, the contemporary Australia we're talking about, that I don't see reflected, and I would like to see more. So one of the things, as I said, I'm doing is to go out and talk to people and get them to understand that, hey, there is an advantage. We're all better for it.
Thanks for that, Shivali. Our next question from the audience is for Meru. What is the biggest challenge you face that you found others had no awareness of?
That's a tough one, because how do you define what's the biggest challenge you face? Because I think everyone has a personal experience. I think for me, I'm thinking back to when I first moved here as a 21-year-old international student to do a PhD. I was definitely very, very young to be starting a PhD at that age, and it's a very self-directed degree. And I'd come from an environment which was extremely supportive. I come from a highly educated family, and I have that privilege behind me where my parents, my family, most of them are highly educated, have always encouraged us to push harder and to achieve more, and never really stopped or limited us from aiming big or wanting to do whatever we wanted to do, lots of choices in the career paths we wanted. And so when I moved here for my PhD, I think one of the biggest change, and it wasn't a culture shock in my personal experiences in life as much as in the professional spaces, how opportunities were made available. So I'd come from an environment where, and I don't think this is just an Asian thing. I've had other European friends, Mediterranean friends say the similar thing. And I think we kind of had this expectation that if you do well, you will be plucked up and given an opportunity and be made, you'd get the visibility for it and be given a meaningful opportunity. That didn't happen. And I found that quite challenging as a 21-year-old in a very Anglo environment, despite having some international students around. And so that, and especially in sciences, if you're not as an international student, it puts an extra pressure because you're on a tight time frame. Your scholarship ends in 3 years' time. You've got to achieve a huge, and PhD is a mammoth amount of work. Most people go for beyond 3 years. It's unusual to finish a PhD in 3 years. So that puts an extra pressure. But also, what about the leadership opportunities and the non-science opportunities that come doing outreach or putting yourself out there for other communication activities? That didn't happen. And over the course of time, I've had to learn and work through putting my hand up and encouraging other people to put their hand up and asking for opportunities and just calling out that this is the level that I need. And it still happens to me. I had to do it last week where I'm like, well, this is what I'm at. This is how much time I can give you. And that equation does change, but I do think it's challenging. And I don't completely agree that we should change who we are. Anyone. It's the systems that should change. We shouldn't have to, but the systems are also slow to change. So it's kind of a balance. But I do think there is that difference in certain cultural and leaders. And I read something very recently or heard something that a good leader is a caring leader. And that doesn't always work. So there will be a bunch of leaders who will be, it sounds like in Shivali's experience, she did have excellent supervisors and bosses who were willing to give opportunities, and that doesn't always happen. And I think for me, that has throughout my career been one of my biggest challenges, is the lack of that ability, and also knowing what I want. They might think this is an opportunity, but I actually don't want that opportunity as well. So what I want is here and this kind of opportunity. So really listening. But so it has meant that I've had to train myself and say, I want to do this, or I can do this. And that's not always easy. And it can be confronting, and you're constantly like, well, I wish it was easier, but it's not easy, and we've just got to toughen up.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you've touched on, actually. And I think I might ask this next question to Wesa, because I think she can shed light on it. And it's about, putting your hand up, and that mindset. And I think it's a very Asian mindset of being like quite humble, and that respect that you learn from, your culture and your parents. And like, so how do you go about navigating that, Wesa? Like, step into promoting yourself in Western culture, especially when you're an Asian female?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because even for myself, I struggled when I first started, even though I grew up in Australia, and so understanding the culture, but then at the same time, it was still really hard. So I remember the first time when I needed to put in an application for something, and I sat on it for about a whole week. And the reason why I had to sit on it for a whole week was because, if I ask somebody to support me in this, am I actually trying to be, boasting about my own achievements? Am I actually doing that? Rather than actually, for other people, they might just decide, okay, well, I'm just going to do this. And what changed my own thinking was, well, I'm actually only just putting myself forward. It's actually not me that makes the selection. So making that change in my mindset, saying I'm actually showing people that I exist. So that's the only statement I'm making if you are putting yourself forward, and allowing other people to make that call, and be okay also to accept that you didn't get the role, or you didn't get the promotion, things like that. So I think to be able to change that mindset a little bit can assist. And in terms of humbleness, I guess one of the things that I have done was to actually use it. And I think there's actually something quite beautiful about being humble. And I think Australians actually do appreciate it if you know how to use it well. And especially when it comes to advocacy for, more Asian Australian leaders, people actually like to see a humble leader. When they actually see one, they actually love them. It's just that we don't put ourselves forward enough. And I think we need to have more and more people who do promote Asian Australian leaders. I mean, even at the moment, the ANU Centre for Asian Australian Leadership has been doing a lot of work to promote Asian Australian leaders. I think this is wonderful because it actually puts great people out there, and to say, well, they do exist and they are very humble, but then at the same time, they're actually doing wonderful work. So I don't think we should lose the humbleness, but it's actually knowing when to use it, and when there are times when you actually need to put yourself forward and be able to accept recognition and, take some of the credit that you've actually done some great work as well.
It's very true. And I can know that, you're all leaders in your field, and I'll pivot this over to Shelley. I guess this question was about how do you answer the question, where are you really from? And how do you overcome that sort of that sort of mindset when people ask you that?
I think this probably goes back to my first answer again. I know some people take a lot of offense from that question, but I guess to me it shows that the other person is curious about who you are and your thinking, and your cultural background. I try and sort of spin it in a way that they're actually interested in your thought processes and maybe some of the coloring around that. I mean, the way I very much reply is, because I was born in Hong Kong. I moved here when I was 3 years old. I'm Australian. I'm Australian. But and then obviously they escalate to where are you really from? Well, cultural background wise, I'm Chinese Australian. But I embrace that as a positive. I see that as that makes me more than just a normal Australian. It's an extra, it's a bonus, it's a value add. Aren't you lucky? You're getting extra. And so
it's very true.
Yeah, you're getting more than the average Australian. So sorry, no offense to the average Australians out there, but the idea is, again, I think just going back to the talk about flipping, Wesa, about changing your perspective on a few things. If you are the only one in the room, that's great. You're going to be memorized. You're going to be remembered. If they're really asking about your background, they're kind of interested in who you are, and I see that as a positive sort of signal, because then it gets me to pull in other things that I can talk about, redivert the question, if you like a well-practiced politician. And so, this is, I think, for me, a way to open up dialogue in a different, sort of perspective, and it's up to you to divert the conversation.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. I've left Karina with about 1 minute. There's just so much stuff that we can learn from all five of you, and there was quite a few Q&As that came through, but I can't get to. So I'll hand it back over to Karina. Apologies for that.
No need to apologise at all, Kirsten. It's been a terrific conversation. So thank you all so much. I'm Karina Bertram. I'm a board member at KPMG and also a council member of AsiaLink. So I'm so proud and delighted to have seen our organisations come together today for this incredibly important conversation. And it's a continuation of some of the theme our Asian Female Leaders Network have been discussing at KPMG. And the insights from all of you today are just so valuable to them. So thank you so much for everything that you have shared with all of us. In particular, I've really been inspired by the 40 under 40 stories of their own personal journeys and their tips and tricks today. particularly around how everyone should really value and highlight their uniqueness. And that's something we certainly encourage at KPMG. We want our team to bring their whole selves to work and be comfortable in doing that. And we've recognised today that's not always easy, and it's a bit of a journey that everyone does need to go on. So some of those insights from Shelley around how she's done that have been, I think, really valuable to the team. We've heard how that's supported by the data and literature from Wesa, and then the courage it takes to do it from Tessa, and your examples have been absolutely amazing. Meru and Shivali have also added in that leadership involves sponsorship, and caring and humble natures are really valued. And that's certainly how we think about leadership at KPMG. So all of your stories today have really highlighted some things that align with our values, and I'm sure have been incredibly important to our Asian female leaders and the broader audience to hear from all of you today. In particular, we all need to see leaders who look and feel a bit like ourselves. And the fact that all of you have smashed the bamboo and glass ceilings is inspiring to everyone on this call today, and certainly gives us all hope that many more people can follow in your footsteps. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to hear from all of you today. We value your time, and thanks to the audience for joining into this really valuable conversation. We are going to ask you to provide us with a bit of feedback, and the survey link is here. So we'd really be keen to hear what you gained from this session, and if there's anything else that we can do in the future to bring these sorts of conversations to all of you so that we can keep the conversation going. So with that, I'll thank you all very much for your time, and thank you to Penny and the AsiaLink team for partnering with us on this really important conversation. Have a good day.